The highly trained German Shepherd suddenly ignored every one of his master's commands. It barked incessantly, tearing at the damp earth with its claws beneath the roots of an ancient oak tree. Its owner, Lucas Grayson, a combat veteran searching only for peace, initially dismissed it. But Kaiser's strange persistence forced him to pick up a shovel. What he found wasn't a bone or an animal. It was a thick, rusted iron chain link, buried deep in the earth as if it were anchoring a dark secret. That chain was only the beginning. It led him to a locked metal box, buried for decades. And what was hidden inside would not only shatter the peace he so desperately sought, but would also force him to confront a deadly legacy that the entire town had tried to bury. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The relentless Oregon rain was a familiar companion, a ceaseless whisper against the old farmhouse windows that Lucas Grayson had come to cherish. It was 4:37 a.m., a time when most of the world still slept, but Lucas had been awake for hours, the lingering tendrils of a nightmare slowly receding, leaving behind the acrid taste of fear and failure. He rose from the sparse comfort of his bed, his movements precise and economical, a testament to years of military training. Lucas Grayson was a man etched by experience. At 45 years old, his face was a tapestry of sharp angles and deep lines, particularly around his piercing steel-gray eyes that held a distant, haunted quality. A neatly trimmed beard, flecked with silver, framed a jawline that spoke of quiet resolve. His physique, though no longer at its peak combat readiness, remained lean and powerful, evident in the broad shoulders and strong forearms that bore the faint ghost-like scars of past encounters. He wore the uniform of solitude well, a faded denim shirt, sturdy work pants, and worn leather boots. Practical attire for the isolated life he had chosen here, deep within the heart of Pine Ridge. His past as an Army Ranger had left an indelible mark, not just on his body, but more profoundly, on his soul. The relentless pursuit of solitude was his chosen penance, a desperate attempt to outrun the echoes of a specific, devastating mission from years ago. A mission in a dusty, war-torn village where he had failed to save a young, terrified girl from a tragic fate. Her wide, pleading eyes forever burned into his memory. The quiet hum of the rain, the vast emptiness of the surrounding forest, and the predictable rhythm of farm life were his only remedies, a fragile shield against the chaos within. As he made his way to the kitchen for his ritualistic first cup of black coffee, a soft thud and a low, rumbling whimper came from the corner of the room. This was Kaiser, Lucas's constant shadow and most trusted confidant. Kaiser was a magnificent German Shepherd, nearly 6 years old, with a striking coat of silver gray and white markings that made him stand out from his peers. His eyes, intelligent and watchful, were a deep amber reflecting a profound loyalty. More than just a pet, Kaiser was a highly trained former military working dog, specifically bred and trained for detection and protection. His temperament was a remarkable blend of unwavering discipline and deep affection. He was Lucas's partner, his therapy, and his connection to a world that often felt too loud, too demanding. At this moment, Kaiser was curled tightly on his designated mat, his muscular body twitching slightly, as he too seemed to be grappling with an unseen disturbance. Lucas knelt beside him, running a calloused hand over Kaiser's soft fur. "Rough night, huh, boy?" he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Kaiser responded with a soft nudge of his head, his eyes meeting Lucas's with an almost human understanding. The bond between them was profound, forged in shared experiences and silent camaraderie. The sun eventually pierced through the heavy clouds, casting a weak, watery light over the damp Oregon landscape. Lucas, armed with his coffee and a sense of routine, stepped out onto the porch. Kaiser, now fully alert, was already there, his tail giving a few tentative thumps against the wooden floorboards. They began their morning patrol of the sprawling, slightly overgrown property that Lucas had purchased 3 years ago. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and wet earth, a comforting aroma to Lucas. He watched Kaiser, who moved with the powerful grace of his breed, nose to the ground, meticulously inspecting every scent, every fallen leaf. Suddenly, Kaiser's demeanor shifted. His tail, usually held high with a gentle wag, stiffened. His ears perked up, swiveling independently as if trying to pinpoint an elusive sound. He let out a low, guttural growl, not one of aggression, but of deep apprehension. His powerful body tensed, and his silver-gray fur bristled slightly along his spine. Lucas, ever vigilant, noticed the change immediately. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to the small, worn leather holster at his hip, where he carried a compact .45 pistol, a habit he couldn't shake. He scanned the tree line, then the rolling fields, but saw nothing amiss. No deer, no stray coyote, no unusual movements. Kaiser, however, was fixated. He began to pull insistently on his leash, dragging Lucas towards an older, less frequented section of the property. It was a patch of uneven ground, partially overgrown with thick ferns and thorny bushes, dominated by a massive, ancient oak tree, whose gnarled branches stretched towards the sky like skeletal arms. As they approached the oak, Kaiser became increasingly agitated. He started to bark, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the quiet woods. He strained against the leash, digging his powerful paws into the soft earth, his head down, nose working furiously, sniffing and snorting at a particular spot near the base of the gnarled roots. Then, with an almost frantic energy, he began to scratch and dig at the ground, dirt flying in every direction. "Kaiser, heel!" Lucas commanded, his voice firm, trying to rein in the excited animal. But Kaiser ignored him, a rare occurrence. His focus was absolute, his determination unwavering. He continued to dig, letting out short, sharp barks of frustration and excitement. Lucas watched him, a growing sense of unease coiling in his gut. Kaiser wasn't just chasing a squirrel or digging for a mole. This was different. His highly trained senses, usually so precise and reliable, were telling him something profound. There was an undeniable intensity in the dog's actions, a primal instinct overriding his training. After several minutes of relentless digging, Kaiser suddenly stopped. He pawed at the freshly disturbed earth, then let out a sharp whine, looking up at Lucas with those intelligent amber eyes, a clear message in their depths. "It's here. Something is here." Lucas took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and something else, something subtly metallic and old, now reaching him. The morning had started like any other, a quiet struggle against his inner demons. But Kaiser, his loyal shadow, had just pulled him to the brink of a mystery, a silent summons from the depths of his own land. He knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in his stomach, that he couldn't ignore this. Whatever Kaiser had found, it wasn't going to be a simple old bone. He decided he would come back tomorrow, shovel in hand, to investigate properly. The peace he had so desperately sought in Pine Ridge was about to be shattered. Sleep had been a shallow, restless affair. The image of Kaiser digging with such frantic purpose played on a loop in Lucas Grayson's mind, a silent alarm he could not switch off. He woke before the sun, the gray, pre-dawn light filtering into his room, finding Kaiser already awake, his amber eyes fixed on him from the foot of the bed. The dog's usual morning placidity was gone, replaced by a quiet, expectant energy. After a quick, tasteless breakfast, Lucas pulled on his sturdy work boots. He grabbed a heavy, flat-nosed shovel from the shed, its steel edge worn smooth from years of use. As he stepped outside, the air hung heavy and still. The rain had finally ceased, but the world was saturated, dripping from the eaves of the barn and the needles of the towering pines. A thick mist clung to the ground, muffling all sound and lending an ethereal quality to the morning. Kaiser needed no encouragement. He trotted ahead, his powerful form cutting through the low-lying fog, leading Lucas directly back to the ancient oak tree. The patch of disturbed earth from the previous day was a dark scar on the green landscape. Kaiser sniffed at it once, then sat back on his haunches, whining softly as if to say, "Well, get on with it." Lucas drove the shovel into the soft, damp soil. The work was difficult. The oak's roots, thick as a man's arm, crisscrossed just beneath the surface, forcing him to reposition and dig with care. With each shovelful of dark, loamy earth he tossed aside, a faint, unusual scent began to rise. It wasn't the clean smell of soil or the decay of leaves. It was something else, musty, organic, with a faint metallic undertone. He paused, looking at the ground. He noticed how the recent, relentless downpour had washed away the topsoil around the tree's base, exposing roots that were usually buried deeper. The erosion had clearly made this area more vulnerable, perhaps allowing a long-trapped scent to escape. It was a plausible explanation, he thought. A scent too faint for a human nose, but not for a trained dog like Kaiser. After 20 minutes of strenuous digging, the shovel struck something hard with a jarring clang that vibrated up the wooden handle and into his arms. It wasn't the dull thud of a rock or the splintering sound of a root. It was metal. Kaiser shot to his feet, barking once, a sharp affirmative sound. Lucas knelt, using his hands to clear away the loose dirt. His fingers brushed against something cold, rough, and pitted with rust. He uncovered a thick, circular piece of iron, a chain link. He pulled at it. It was unyielding, disappearing deeper into the earth. With renewed determination, he dug around it, following its path. Link after rusted link emerged from the soil, a grotesque metal spine leading him downwards. The chain seemed to be anchored to something larger. He dug wider, deeper, his muscles burning with the effort. Finally, the shovel scraped against a flat metal surface. He worked for another half-hour, sweat beading on his brow, despite the cool morning air, until he had cleared enough earth to reveal the object's full shape. It was a military-style footlocker, an old ammunition box made of heavy-gauge steel, painted an olive drab that was now mostly obscured by rust and caked on mud. The chain he had first found was wrapped around it twice and secured to a heavy, rusted padlock on the front. It had been buried with deliberate intent. Getting it out of the ground was a battle. The box was immensely heavy, and the suction of the wet clay held it fast. Grunting with exertion, Lucas used the shovel as a lever, slowly prying it from its earthen grave. At last, with a great sucking sound, the box came free. He dragged it out of the hole and onto the grass, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Kaiser circled it cautiously, sniffing at the rusted metal, his low whimper a constant, curious hum. Lucas hauled the heavy container back to his barn, the metal scraping against the gravel path. Inside the cavernous, quiet space, surrounded by the smell of hay and old tools, he laid the box on the concrete floor. The padlock was a solid mass of corrosion, the keyhole completely sealed by decades of rust. There would be no picking this lock. He retrieved a long steel crowbar and a heavy sledgehammer from his workshop. After positioning the crowbar's tip in the padlock's shackle, he brought the hammer down with a powerful, controlled strike. The resulting clang echoed through the barn like a gunshot. It took 3 more strikes, each one sending shivers of impact up his arms, before the rusted metal finally groaned, protested, and then snapped. The chain fell away with a clatter. For a moment, Lucas just stood there, staring at the box. The silence felt heavy, expectant. He wedged the crowbar under the lid and, with all his strength, heaved upwards. The lid, sealed tight by time and pressure, resisted for a second before giving way with a loud, piercing screech of tortured metal. A wave of musty, stale air washed over him, the scent of damp paper, decaying leather, and something else, the faint, sorrowful smell of long-forgotten things. He peered inside. The contents were nestled in the damp, dark interior. On top lay a small, leather-bound journal, its cover warped and stained, the pages swollen with moisture. Beside it, glinting dully in the dim light, was a silver locket on a delicate chain, tarnished almost black, with a noticeable dent in its side. And beneath that, resting on a bed of what looked like rotted cloth, was a heavy star-shaped badge. He reached in with a hesitant hand, his fingers closing around the badge first. It was heavy, its surface pitted and green with corrosion. He rubbed away the grime with his thumb, revealing the faint, stamped words. He could just make out the title, Sheriff, and beneath it, a name, Miller. He set the badge aside and picked up the locket. It was surprisingly light. He fumbled with the clasp, which eventually sprang open. Inside were two tiny, faded photographs, but they were too damaged by moisture for him to make out any clear features. Finally, he lifted out the diary. It was fragile, the leather soft and crumbly to the touch. He knew trying to open it now would only destroy it. Lucas sat back on his heels, the three objects laid out on the concrete floor before him. The quiet solitude of his barn had been invaded. This was not a time capsule. This was a grave of secrets. A diary filled with lost words, a locket holding faded faces, and the badge of a lawman, all buried together under a heavy chain. The piece he had come to Pine Ridge to find had just been dug up, replaced by a cold, unsettling mystery that now lay at his feet. The three objects sat on the rough-hewn surface of Lucas Grayson's kitchen table, a silent testament to a long-buried secret. The corroded badge, the dented locket, and the swollen, waterlogged diary. It was the diary that held his attention. It was the heart of the matter, the voice that could give meaning to the other two silent witnesses. But it was too fragile, the pages fused together by decades of dampness. To open it now would be to turn it to pulp. Lucas, drawing on the patience and methodical precision learned in the military, knew he could not rush this. He spent the better part of the morning carefully setting up a makeshift drying station. He placed the diary on a wire rack, positioning a low-wattage desk lamp above it, its gentle, consistent warmth just enough to slowly draw out the moisture without making the paper brittle. Every hour, he would return to gently separate a single page, blotting it with absorbent paper before turning it over. It was a painstaking process, a delicate operation that required a surgeon's touch. Kaiser seemed to understand the gravity of the task. The German shepherd lay on the cool linoleum floor nearby, his head resting on his paws, his amber eyes never straying far from Lucas. He was a silent, watchful guardian, his presence a comforting anchor in the tense quiet of the farmhouse. By late afternoon, the first few pages were dry enough to read. Lucas sat down at the table, the lamplight casting a warm glow on the faded, spidery script. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. The handwriting was neat, almost calligraphic, full of youthful loops and flourishes. The first entry was dated May 12, 1985. "My dearest diary," it began. He looked at me again today by the old town square. His smile is like sunshine, and I feel my heart might beat right out of my chest. To think that someone like him, from a family like his, would even notice a girl like me. It feels like a dream. Lucas read on, piecing together the story of a young woman named Abigail Reed. Her voice, full of innocence and hope, emerged from the pages. She wrote of secret meetings in the woods, of stolen kisses by the creek, of a whirlwind romance with a man she never named, but described as the handsome, charming son of the most powerful family in Pine Ridge. As Lucas turned the pages, he could feel the shift. The joyful, looping script grew tighter, more compact. The entries, once filled with breathless excitement, became clouded with worry. October 3, 1985. I told him the news today. I thought he would be happy. We could run away, start a life of our own. But his face, it went cold. He spoke of his family's name, of his inheritance, of a future that suddenly had no room for me, or for the new life growing inside me. He told me not to worry, that he would handle it. But the way he said it, it sounded like a threat. Lucas's jaw tightened. He continued reading, the sense of dread growing with each page. Abigail's world was shrinking, her hope turning to fear. Her lover had become a source of terror, his visits infrequent and his words sharp and cruel. She was isolated, with no one to turn to. Then came the entry that made Lucas's blood run cold. November 18, 1985. He brought Sheriff Miller to see me today. The sheriff was kind at first. He said he understood my situation, that he would talk to the family, make things right. He promised to help me. But there was something in his eyes, a coldness. He told me to keep quiet, for my own good. He said some secrets are better left buried. The final entry was short, the handwriting a frantic, jagged scrawl. November 21, 1985. They know I won't stay quiet. He is coming for me tonight. He said we have to talk, by the old oak. Sheriff Miller told me to go. He said it was the only way. I am so afraid. If anything happens to me, let the world know I did not go willingly. Lucas pushed the chair back from the table, his breath catching in his throat. The musty smell of the old paper seemed to fill his lungs, thick and cloying. Abigail's terror, her utter helplessness, reached across the 40-year gap and gripped him with an icy hand. And then it happened. The quiet farmhouse kitchen dissolved around him. He was no longer in Oregon. He was back in the suffocating heat and dust of a forgotten village, the air thick with the smell of smoke and cordite. He saw her face, not Abigail's, but the face of the young girl, no older than 12, with wide, dark eyes filled with a terror that mirrored the words he had just read. She was trapped in a crumbling building, and he had been tasked with getting her out. But he had hesitated, a split-second tactical miscalculation, and the roof had collapsed. He could still hear the sound of it, a deafening roar that had silenced her screams forever. He had failed her. He had seen her fear, her plea for help, and he had failed. Lucas slammed his fist on the table, a strangled cry escaping his lips. Kaiser was instantly on his feet, whining and nudging his head insistently against Lucas's hand, pulling him back from the precipice of memory. Lucas gasped, the kitchen slowly coming back into focus. He was trembling, a cold sweat on his brow. He looked down at the diary, at Abigail's last, desperate words. The two images, the two girls, merged into one who had died in the chaos of war, and one who had been silenced in the quiet treachery of her own town. Both were victims, their voices extinguished, their pleas for help unanswered. In that moment, something inside Lucas shifted. The detached curiosity he had felt was burned away, replaced by a white-hot, focused resolve. This was no longer someone else's story. It was his. The guilt he had carried for years, a heavy shroud he could never cast off, now had a purpose. He couldn't save the girl from the rubble, but he could damn well get justice for Abigail Reed. His quest for peace had been a fool's errand, an attempt to hide from a ghost he could not outrun. But this was a mission. It was a chance, however small, at redemption. He would not fail again. He would be the voice for the girl who had been silenced. He picked up the old sheriff's badge, its weight feeling heavier now. Sheriff Miller. He had promised to help her, and he had betrayed her. Lucas's fingers tightened around the cold metal. His personal war had just found its first enemy. The resolution that had settled over Lucas Grayson in the dead of night was a cold, hard thing. It was not the heat of anger, but the focused calm of a soldier with a clear objective. The diary was his intelligence, but it was raw and unverified. He knew from his years in the field that a single source, no matter how compelling, was never enough. To move forward, he needed corroboration. He needed facts, names, and timelines that existed outside the faded pages of Abigail's journal. He left Kaiser at the farmhouse with a fresh bowl of water and a reassuring scratch behind the ears. The German shepherd watched him go with an uncharacteristic stillness, as if sensing the shift in his master's mission. The drive into the small town of Pine Ridge was short. It was a place Lucas usually avoided, a tight-knit community where a stranger's presence was noted and discussed over coffee at the local diner. Today, however, he welcomed the anonymity of being just another face, his true purpose hidden behind a stoic mask. The Pine Ridge Public Library was a modest brick building, a relic of a more optimistic era, its windows large and inviting. Lucas pushed open the heavy oak door, a small bell chiming his arrival. The air inside was warm and smelled of old paper, floor polish, and quiet contemplation. Behind a large circulation desk stood a young woman, her attention focused on a book she was meticulously cataloging. This was Jennifer Monroe. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with intelligent, inquisitive brown eyes, framed by a pair of stylish, dark-rimmed glasses. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple but elegant knot, and she wore a soft gray cardigan over a simple blouse. She carried herself with an air of quiet competence and a deep-seated passion for the world of words and history that surrounded her. When she looked up at Lucas, her expression was welcoming but also perceptively sharp. She immediately registered him as someone who didn't fit the profile of her usual patrons. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice clear and friendly. "I hope so," Lucas replied, his own voice a low rumble. "I'm researching the history of my property, the old Callaway farm out on the North Road. I was hoping to look at any town archives you might have, old newspapers specifically, from around 1985. Jennifer's professional curiosity was piqued. "Of course, we have most of the Pine Ridge Chronicle on microfilm. It's a bit cumbersome, but it's all there. The archives are downstairs. Follow me." She led him down a narrow staircase into a cool, dry basement. The room was lined with gray metal shelves, stacked high with bound volumes and cardboard boxes. In the center of the room sat a pair of bulky, beige microfilm readers. For the next hour, Lucas scrolled through reels of film, the ghostly black and white images of a bygone Pine Ridge flashing before his eyes. He scanned articles about town fairs, high school football games, and local politics, but found no mention of any missing persons, no reports of any major crimes. The official record was clean, as if the town had collectively decided to erase any unpleasantness. Jennifer, who had been working at a nearby table, noticed his growing frustration. "Finding what you're looking for?" Lucas shook his head, leaning back from the machine and rubbing his tired eyes. "No, nothing. I was told a young woman might have gone missing around that time. Her name was Abigail Reed." The moment he said the name, the atmosphere in the room changed. Jennifer froze, her hands stilling over the documents she was sorting. She looked up at him, her friendly, professional demeanor replaced by an expression of intense, guarded surprise. "Why are you looking for her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas met her gaze, sensing he was at a crossroads. He decided to trust his gut. "I have reason to believe she didn't just run away." Jennifer took a deep breath and pulled up a chair opposite him. "My grandmother was Eleanor Monroe," she said softly. "She and Abigail Reed were best friends. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago, but she never, not for one day of her life, believed that Abby just left. She said Abby was happy. She was in love, but she was also terrified." Lucas listened intently, his posture straightening. "Grandma always said the official story was a lie," Jennifer continued, her eyes shining with a mixture of old sorrow and fresh determination. "She said Abby was involved with someone powerful, someone from a family that ran this town then and still runs it now. When Abby disappeared, my grandmother tried to get the police to investigate properly, but she was shut down. She was told to stop asking questions. It haunted her until the day she died. They were no longer a librarian and a patron. They were two strangers, suddenly bound by a 40-year-old secret. "The official records are useless," Jennifer said, her voice firm now. "I've looked before. It's like she never existed. But there's something else?" She stood and led him to a forgotten corner of the archive, to a set of tall metal shelves groaning under the weight of massive, leather-bound newspaper volumes. "These are the originals, before the town started using microfilm. They were donated years ago by the Chronicles founding family. They're not indexed, and they're incredibly fragile. If anything exists, it'll be in here." For the next 2 hours, they worked in tandem, their shared purpose creating a silent, efficient rhythm. They carefully turned the massive yellowed pages, the fragile paper threatening to crumble at their touch. The world upstairs ceased to exist. There was only the dust, the silence, and their relentless search. It was Jennifer who found it. "Lucas," she breathed, her finger tracing a small column of text on the back page of an issue from late November 1985. He moved to her side, leaning over the volume. The article was small, barely a few paragraphs long, under a mundane headline, "Local Woman Reported Missing." It described how Abigail Reed, age 19, had disappeared from her home. But it was the second paragraph that made the hair on Lucas's arms stand on end. While authorities have no official leads, the article read, "Local speculation has linked Ms. Reed to a member of the prominent Hawthorne family, whose eldest son was known to be an acquaintance. Sheriff Miller, heading the investigation, has stated there is no evidence of foul play and believes the young woman likely left town of her own accord. The case is not being treated as suspicious at this time. The Hawthorne family. Sheriff Miller." The names from the diary and the badge were now connected, printed in black and white on a 40-year-old piece of paper. This was the corroboration he needed. This was the proof that Abigail's story was not a fabrication. Lucas and Jennifer looked at each other over the open volume. They didn't need to speak. They both understood the immense gravity of what they had found. They had given a name to the shadow that had haunted Abigail Reed, a name that still cast a long, dark influence over the entire town of Pine Ridge. The quiet search in the archives was over. A much more dangerous investigation had just begun. The quiet conspiracy between Lucas Grayson and Jennifer Monroe deepened as they left the library. The discovery of the old newspaper article had solidified their suspicions, transforming Abigail's faded words into chilling reality. Lucas felt a grim satisfaction, but it was quickly overshadowed by the cold, tactical clarity of an impending conflict. He knew that the Hawthorne name, mentioned in the same breath as a suppressed investigation, was not merely a historical footnote. It was a declaration of war against a deeply entrenched power. He walked Jennifer to her car, the subtle shift in the town's atmosphere already palpable to his heightened senses. Eyes lingered a moment too long. Conversations hushed as they passed. He knew they were being watched, or rather, the unusual pairing of the reclusive ex-soldier and the meticulous librarian was being noted. In a town like Pine Ridge, such observations were quickly processed and relayed. Back at the farmhouse, Lucas found Kaiser waiting anxiously on the porch. The German shepherd greeted him with a frantic but silent energy, nudging his hand, sniffing at his clothes, as if searching for any lingering traces of danger. Lucas, with a calm pat, reassured him. "It's okay, boy. We just stirred up a hornet's nest." He spent the evening fortifying his defenses, not with sandbags and barbed wire, but with information. He meticulously scanned the property for anything that seemed out of place. He checked the old, barely functioning security cameras he'd set up around his perimeter, cheap, consumer-grade models that offered little more than a fuzzy image, but enough to catch any obvious intruders. His tactical mind, sharpened by years of vigilance, was already mapping out possible threats and vulnerabilities. He knew the Hawthorne family wouldn't operate like common criminals. Their power was more insidious. The next afternoon, the relative calm was shattered by the distinct hum of a powerful engine approaching his property. It was not the familiar rumble of a local pickup truck, but the refined, almost silent glide of an expensive luxury sedan. Lucas, already on alert, watched from the kitchen window as a sleek, dark vehicle, a polished testament to wealth, turned off the main road and slowly made its way up his graveled driveway. Kaiser, who had been dozing near the warmth of the wood stove, suddenly sprang to attention. His hackles rose slightly, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. He moved to stand protectively in front of Lucas, his intelligent eyes fixed on the approaching car. The car stopped in front of the farmhouse. From the driver's side, a man in a crisp, dark suit emerged. He was a broad-shouldered individual with an air of quiet efficiency, clearly a professional bodyguard. He moved to the rear passenger door and opened it. Out stepped Charles Hawthorne. Charles Hawthorne was a man in his early 70s, but he carried himself with an aristocratic posture that belied his age. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, parted precisely to one side. His face, though marked by the inevitable lines of time, was sharp and intelligent, with a thin-lipped mouth that rarely betrayed emotion. He wore an exquisitely tailored dark suit, the fabric rich and smooth, a stark contrast to Lucas's utilitarian work clothes. His eyes, a pale, almost colorless blue, were unsettlingly piercing, holding a calculating glint that missed nothing. He exuded an aura of old money, inherited power, and unwavering authority. He was the unquestioned patriarch of the Hawthorne family, the silent ruler of Pine Ridge, and the man Lucas now suspected of orchestrating a 40-year cover-up. Charles took a moment to survey Lucas's humble farmhouse, his gaze lingering on the dilapidated barn and the overgrown fields, a subtle expression of disdain on his face. Then, with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he began to approach. Lucas stepped onto the porch, Kaiser a formidable presence at his side, still growling softly. "Mr. Grayson, I presume?" Charles' voice was smooth, cultured, and devoid of any genuine warmth. "Charles Hawthorne, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," Lucas replied, his voice flat. He didn't offer a handshake. Charles's smile remained, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his pale eyes. "A direct man, I see. I appreciate that. I'm simply here to offer a neighborly welcome, and perhaps discuss a business opportunity." "What business opportunity?" Charles gestured vaguely at the surrounding land. "This property, the old Callaway farm. It borders a significant portion of my family's estate. We've always considered it an integral part of the larger landscape. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer, Mr. Grayson. An offer that would far exceed its market value, I assure you. Perhaps twice, even 3 times what you paid for it." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Sentiment, mostly," Charles replied, his smile widening slightly, revealing a flash of expensive dental work. "A desire to consolidate our holdings, to ensure the prosperity of the entire area, and to keep the peace, if you understand my meaning." Lucas understood perfectly. Charles Hawthorne wasn't interested in consolidating land. He was interested in burying secrets. The offer was a test, a sophisticated attempt to buy Lucas's silence, and if that failed, to gauge his resolve. "It's not for sale," Lucas stated, his voice calm but firm. "I like my peace and quiet here." Charles's smile finally faltered. A subtle shift in his demeanor occurred, the veneer of civility thinning. "A shame. I was hoping you would be reasonable. Life in Pine Ridge can be difficult for those who are unwilling to cooperate, Mr. Grayson. This is a quiet town. We like to keep it that way. We don't appreciate people stirring up old dust, if you catch my drift." Kaiser's low growl intensified, his hackles now fully raised, his teeth bared in a silent snarl directed squarely at Charles. The dog's powerful body vibrated with a barely suppressed aggression. Charles, for the first time, looked genuinely surprised, perhaps even a little unnerved, by the dog's ferocity. He took a subtle step back, his eyes hardening. "Your dog is ill-mannered," he observed, his voice now colder, sharper. "He's a good judge of character," Lucas retorted, his gaze unwavering. Charles's eyes locked onto Lucas's, and the pleasant mask finally dropped, revealing the steel beneath. "Indeed, well, perhaps you'll reconsider, Mr. Grayson. Sometimes clinging to the past can be detrimental to one's future, especially in a place like Pine Ridge, where certain truths are best left undisturbed." The implied threat hung heavy in the air, clear and unmistakable. Charles Hawthorne turned on his heel, his bodyguard already opening the car door. As the sleek sedan purred away down the gravel driveway, leaving nothing but dust in its wake, Lucas felt a profound shift. The game was now officially on. Charles Hawthorne hadn't just offered to buy his property, he had announced that he knew Lucas had found something. And by refusing, Lucas had just declared himself an enemy of the most powerful man in Pine Ridge. He looked down at Kaiser, who had finally quieted, though his eyes remained watchful. "Looks like we just poked the bear, boy," Lucas murmured, and that bear just growled back. The afternoon call from Charles Hawthorne had shattered the fragile piece of Lucas Grayson's life, replacing it with the sharp edge of anticipation. Lucas didn't need a crystal ball to know what would come next. He had seen this escalation before, in different uniforms, different landscapes. But the pattern was always the same: a veiled threat, a refusal, then the quiet, insidious creep of hostile action. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of purposeful activity. He meticulously cleaned his .45 pistol and his old hunting rifle, checking every moving part, loading fresh magazines. The farmhouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a perimeter to be secured. He checked his windows, ensuring the old latches held, and reinforced the shed door where the old metal box was hidden. His training kicked in, an instinctual reversion to combat readiness. Kaiser, sensing the shift in Lucas, remained close, his powerful body moving with a low, watchful grace. The dog's occasional soft whines were the only sounds in the tense quiet. Night fell heavy and dark over Pine Ridge, the sky a thick blanket of cloud that smothered the moon and stars. Lucas sat in his living room, the only light coming from a single, low-wattage bulb, casting long, dancing shadows. He held his rifle loosely across his lap, his senses acutely tuned to every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind in the trees. Kaiser lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, but his ears were constantly swiveling, picking up sounds far beyond human hearing. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. The rain began again, a soft, rhythmic drumming that added to the oppressive atmosphere. Lucas fought the urge to close his eyes, battling the fatigue that gnawed at his edges. He knew that if they came, it would be under the cloak of darkness and rain, when visibility was poor and sounds were muffled. Just after midnight, Kaiser stirred. His head snapped up, his body tensing. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within his chest, a sound so primal and potent that it sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. It was a warning, sharp and undeniable. Lucas immediately silenced Kaiser with a whispered command. "Easy, boy. What is it?" Kaiser didn't respond verbally, but his gaze was fixed on the kitchen window, facing the rear of the property. Lucas followed his lead, his eyes straining through the rain-streaked glass, seeing only the shifting shadows of the trees. He heard nothing but the rain, but Kaiser heard. Without a sound, Lucas slipped into a crouch, his rifle held ready. He moved with the practiced stealth of a predator, making his way to the kitchen. Kaiser, equally silent, was already there, his nose pressed against the crack beneath the window, a low, continuous growl now escaping him. Then Lucas heard it too, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape. Not the wind, not a branch. The sound of something, or someone, moving purposefully. A moment later, A figure detached itself from the inky blackness outside the kitchen window. It was a man, large and heavily built, moving with the quiet competence of someone who knew what they were doing. He wore dark clothing and a balaclava that completely obscured his face. He was clearly not an amateur thief. Before Lucas could react, the man produced a pry bar and, with practiced force, inserted it into the old wooden window frame. With a muffled crack, the latch gave way. The window slowly began to slide open. Kaiser, with a roar that was half bark, half snarl, launched himself forward. He slammed against the window with unexpected force, his powerful head hitting the glass with a sickening thud. The man outside, startled, recoiled, dropping his pry bar. But he quickly recovered, pulling a small, glinting object from his belt, a switchblade. The man outside slashed frantically through the open window, the blade whistling through the air. Kaiser, snarling, managed to dodge the worst of it, but a sharp yelp escaped him as the blade grazed his flank. A thin line of red appeared on his silver-gray fur. Lucas, seeing Kaiser injured, felt a primal rage ignite within him. This wasn't just about Abigail anymore. They had hurt his dog, his partner. He chambered a round in his rifle with a loud click, aiming it directly at the shadowy figure. "Get out!" Lucas roared, his voice cold and lethal, echoing through the kitchen. "Get the hell off my property!" The man outside hesitated, seeing the rifle barrel pointed directly at him, sensing the absolute intent behind Lucas's voice. He knew he had been made. With a final, furious glance, he turned and melted back into the pouring rain and darkness. Lucas waited, rifle still raised, listening intently. He heard the sounds of quick, retreating footsteps, then the faint hum of a vehicle starting up in the distance, quickly fading into the night. They were gone. For now. He lowered his rifle, his hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline and barely contained fury. He immediately knelt beside Kaiser. The wound was shallow, a long, thin gash on his left flank. It was bleeding, but not profusely. Kaiser whimpered softly, licking the wound, then looked up at Lucas with apologetic eyes. "It's okay, boy," Lucas murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he gently examined the cut. "You saved my ass. Again." He carefully cleaned the wound with antiseptic and bandaged it, his movements tender. Kaiser, though clearly in pain, remained stoic, only a soft whimper escaping him when Lucas applied pressure. The attack confirmed everything. Charles Hawthorne wasn't just a man with a polite offer. He was a ruthless power broker capable of orchestrating violence to protect his family's dark secrets. The subtle pressure had failed. The polite warning had been ignored. Now the gloves were off. Lucas looked around his quiet kitchen, now violated by the attempted intrusion. The peace he had sought here was well and truly shattered. He clutched Kaiser's head, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. This wasn't a fight he could walk away from anymore. They had hurt his dog. This was personal. His resolve, already strong, hardened into an unyielding, unbreakable steel. He would make Charles Hawthorne pay. The night after the break-in was long and sleepless. Lucas Grayson sat in the dark, the weight of his rifle a cold comfort in his hands, while Kaiser lay nearby, the clean white bandage on his flank a stark reminder of the battle that had been brought to his doorstep. The physical perimeter had been breached, but Lucas knew that was only the beginning. Charles Hawthorne was a strategist, and his next move would be more subtle, more pervasive. He saw the first signs of it the next morning when he drove into town to buy supplies and discreetly check on Jennifer. The change was chilling. At the general store, the friendly middle-aged woman behind the counter, who usually offered a warm hello, suddenly became intensely focused on organizing a shelf of canned goods, refusing to meet his eye. Two old-timers sipping coffee by the window fell silent as he walked past, their conversation only resuming in low, suspicious murmurs once he was out of earshot. He was no longer just the quiet recluse. He was a pariah. He found Jennifer in the back room of the library, her face pale and strained. "They're talking," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all over town. That you're an unstable veteran, a dangerous man with a violent past. That you're obsessed, and that you've dragged me into your delusions." Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed her glasses up her nose. "The head of the library board called me this morning. An anonymous complaint was filed. They're concerned about my association with you." Lucas felt a cold fury settle in his gut. This was Hawthorne's doing. A classic psychological warfare tactic: isolate the target, discredit them, turn the community into a weapon. They weren't just trying to silence him, they were trying to erase his credibility, to paint him as a madman so that if he did come forward, no one would listen. "He's trying to box us in," Lucas said, his voice low and hard. "Make us radioactive. We're running out of time, Jennifer. Whispers and rumors, we can't fight that. We need something they can't deny. We need proof." Jennifer nodded, her fear eclipsed by a steely resolve. "The diary," she said. "Abigail mentioned a place, her secret spot with him. Under the weeping willow by the shallow creek. It wasn't the oak tree, it was somewhere else." "A place no one else would know about," Lucas finished, his tactical mind racing. "A place to hide a body." They spent the next hour hunched over an old detailed survey map of the county from the 1980s that Jennifer retrieved from the archives. She pointed to a winding creek that cut through a dense, unpopulated stretch of woods, a section of which bordered the vast Hawthorne estate. "Here," she said. "This area is known for its old willow trees." It was a long shot, but it was the only one they had. They set out that afternoon, taking Lucas's old truck as far as the dirt road would allow before continuing on foot. Kaiser, his flank still tender, but his spirit undiminished, trotted quietly beside Lucas, his senses on high alert. The woods were dense and silent, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. They found the creek easily enough, a shallow, meandering ribbon of water cluttered with smooth gray stones. Following its path, they pushed deeper into the forest. After nearly an hour of searching, Jennifer spotted it, a massive, ancient weeping willow, its long, trailing branches creating a secluded, shaded canopy near a bend in the creek. The area felt still, forgotten by time. As they drew closer, Kaiser's demeanor changed. He began to whine softly, the fur on his neck bristling. He moved ahead of them, his nose twitching, casting back and forth across a patch of ground near the tree's base that was slightly sunken, covered in a thick layer of moss. He circled the spot twice, then stopped, pawing at the earth and letting out a low, mournful howl. "He's found it," Lucas breathed, his heart pounding. He had seen this behavior before. It was the scent of death, however faint and old, that Kaiser had detected. He unslung the small entrenching tool he had brought with him, but before the blade could touch the soil, a voice sliced through the silence. "That's far enough." Lucas and Jennifer froze. Two men stepped out from behind the thick trunk of the willow. One was the broad-shouldered bodyguard Lucas recognized from Charles Hawthorne's visit. The other was a younger, wiry man with cold, dead eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. He held a heavy, rusty tire iron in his hand, swinging it idly. They were Hawthorne's men, sentinels guarding a 40-year-old grave. "Mr. Hawthorne suggested you might come snooping," the bodyguard said, his voice flat and menacing. "He asked us to persuade you to stop." The wiry man took a step forward, a predatory grin on his face. "Persuade you real good." Lucas instinctively moved in front of Jennifer, shielding her with his body. He raised his hands slowly, the entrenching tool still in his grip. "Walk away," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This doesn't concern you." The man with the tire iron laughed, a short, ugly sound. "It does now." He lunged, but he never reached Lucas. With a sound that was pure, explosive fury, Kaiser launched himself forward. A blur of silver gray and white fur, he hit the wiry man square in the chest, his momentum sending the man staggering backward with a cry of shock and pain. Kaiser didn't bite. He slammed and snarled, a chaotic force of nature designed to disorient and disable. The bodyguard, momentarily stunned by the dog's sudden attack, turned his attention to Kaiser, raising a heavy boot to kick him. It was the opening Lucas needed. "Run!" he yelled to Jennifer. He swung the entrenching tool, its steel edge connecting solidly with the bodyguard's outstretched arm. The man grunted in pain, stumbling back. Lucas didn't wait for a second chance. He grabbed Jennifer's arm, pulling her with him. "Kaiser, with me!" he commanded. The dog, hearing his master's call, disengaged from the now panicked henchman and bounded after them. They plunged into the dense, trackless forest, away from the creek, away from the path. Behind them, they could hear the enraged shouts of Hawthorne's men. They ran, fueled by adrenaline and fear, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, the sounds of their pursuers growing fainter behind them. They had escaped, but they were now lost, hunted, and deep within the dark woods that bordered their enemy's land. The flight through the forest was a blur of instinct and adrenaline. Lucas Grayson, moving with a predator's certainty, guided Jennifer through the dense, dark woods, his internal compass unerring. Kaiser, a silent gray shadow, flanked them, his head low, his earlier aggression replaced by a focused, protective vigilance. They circled wide, avoiding any known paths, the sounds of their pursuers long since faded into the oppressive quiet of the wilderness. It was well after nightfall when they finally emerged from the tree line at the edge of Lucas's property. Exhausted, caked in mud, and scratched from thorns, they paused in the darkness, looking towards the farmhouse. A profound sense of wrongness immediately washed over Lucas. The house was a black silhouette against the slightly less black sky. The single, low-wattage security light he always left on by the barn was dark. "Stay here," he whispered to Jennifer, his voice a low command. "Kaiser, with me. Watch." The dog gave a soft whine of understanding. Lucas moved forward, a ghost in the long grass, his senses screaming that this was a trap. He crept towards the utility pole at the edge of his driveway. The beam of his small flashlight revealed what he already suspected. The telephone line had been deliberately severed, the cut clean and precise. He then made his way to the side of the house. The power meter was still, its digital display dark. The main line from the pole had been cut. He knew what he would find before he saw it. Crouching low, he moved through the ditch along the main road until he had a clear view of his driveway entrance. A massive Hawthorne logging truck was parked across it, its bulk completely blocking any access. Two men stood beside it, smoking cigarettes, their forms illuminated by the brief orange glow. They weren't trying to fix the truck. They were lookouts. Sentries. A cold, hard realization settled in Lucas's gut. The confrontation at the creek hadn't been a failed capture attempt. It had been a feint, a maneuver designed to flush them out, to herd them away from the farm so that Hawthorne's forces could move in and set up the cage without resistance. They were cut off. No power, no communication, no escape. The siege had begun. "They've isolated us," he said grimly when he returned to Jennifer. "Completely." Jennifer's face was pale in the darkness, but her eyes were resolute. "So what do we do?" "We fight," Lucas said, his voice devoid of hesitation. "This is my home. This is our ground. We make our stand here." They slipped back onto the property through the dark woods, entering the cold, silent farmhouse through the back door. The familiar space, once a sanctuary, now felt alien and hostile. It was a tomb waiting to be breached. But for a soldier like Lucas, it was also defensible terrain. His PTSD, the haunting ghosts of his past, receded, replaced by the sharp, cold clarity of combat. He was no longer Lucas Grayson, the broken recluse. He was Sergeant Grayson, United States Army Ranger, and he had a perimeter to secure. "Listen to me, Jennifer," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through her fear. "We're going to turn this house into a fortress. I need your help. Do exactly as I say." She nodded, her trust in him absolute. For the next several hours, they worked in the dark, using only a small, battery-powered lantern. Lucas's plan was a master class in asymmetrical warfare, using limited resources to create a formidable defense. He didn't have military-grade equipment, but he had a barn full of tools and a mind trained to improvise, adapt, and overcome. First came the early warning system. He took spools of high-tensile fishing line and, with painstaking care, strung them at ankle height in the woods surrounding the house, creating a spiderweb of tripwires. Each line was connected to a carefully balanced stack of old tin cans on a windowsill or a set of wind chimes he hung from a low branch. It was crude, but it would give them precious seconds of warning. Next, he created obstacles. He rolled old tires, barrels, and a rusty harrow from the barn into the open spaces, creating a chaotic landscape that would break up any direct assault and force intruders into predictable channels, fatal funnels where they would be exposed. The house itself was the final bastion. They dragged heavy furniture, the old oak bookshelf, the solid wood dining table, and barricaded the front and back doors. Lucas used his cordless drill and long screws to board up all the downstairs windows with planks he ripped from the barn wall, leaving only small, narrow slits to see and shoot through. "They'll expect us to be blind," he explained, his breath fogging in the cold air. "These will give us an advantage." Jennifer worked tirelessly at his side, her fear channeled into focused energy. She gathered materials, held boards in place, and kept a constant watchful eye on the dark tree line. She was terrified, but she refused to be helpless. The final piece of his defense was the most important: Kaiser. The dog's senses were 1,000 times sharper than any human's. Lucas brought him to the center of the house, in the dark hallway that connected the front and back rooms. "Watch, boy," Lucas commanded softly, running a hand over the dog's head. "You're our alarm. You hear anything, you tell me. Anything." Kaiser seemed to understand. He lay down, his body tense and alert, his ears swiveling in the darkness, sampling the air for any alien scent. He was the living heart of their fortress, a biological early warning system that no technology could match. By 3:01 a.m. they were done. The farmhouse was dark, cold, and silent as a tomb. But it was no longer a vulnerable target. It was a hard point, a defensive position bristling with makeshift traps and tactical ingenuity. Lucas, Jennifer, and Kaiser sat together in the dark living room, the unplugged rifle cold in Lucas's hands. The world outside was utterly silent, the only sound their own quiet breathing. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and completely alone. The waiting had begun. They were no longer the hunted, fleeing through the woods. They were the defenders, ready for the coming storm. The silence in the fortified farmhouse was a living thing, a suffocating pressure that grew heavier with each passing hour. Lucas Grayson, Jennifer Monroe, and Kaiser waited in the oppressive darkness, a trio of prisoners in a self-made fortress. Outside, the world was still, but Lucas knew it was the stillness of a predator gathering itself to strike. He sat by one of the narrow slits he had cut in the boarded-up windows, his rifle resting on the sill, his eyes scanning the impenetrable blackness of the woods. He had been in situations like this before, surrounded and outgunned. He knew how it ended. A defensive position was a fixed position, and a fixed position, given enough time and pressure, always falls. "They'll come before dawn," he said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to be absorbed by the shadows. "They'll wait until we're exhausted. Then they'll hit us from all sides. We can't win this way, Jennifer. We can't win by waiting for them." Jennifer, huddled in a blanket on the floor, looked up at him, her face a pale oval in the gloom. "So what do we do?" "We change the objective," he said, the strategist in him taking over. The objective isn't to survive an attack here. The objective is to get the evidence out. Abigail's diary is our only real weapon. If it stays here with us, it dies with us. One of us has to get through." He pulled out a modern topographical map of the area, spreading it on the floor and shining his small flashlight on it. "They'll have every known route covered. The main road, the logging trails, the deer paths. They'll be watching everything." He traced the perimeter with his finger, the reality of their situation stark and grim. They were completely encircled. For a moment, a heavy despair settled over the room. Jennifer stared at the map, at the impossible ring of darkness that surrounded them. Then her eyes unfocused slightly, her mind delving into the vast archives of her memory. She saw the dusty, oversized survey maps she and Lucas had looked at just days before. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with a sudden, urgent energy. She knelt beside the map. "Your map is wrong, or not wrong, just incomplete." She took a pen from her pocket and, with a few deft strokes on the back of an old envelope, began to sketch from memory. She drew the familiar lines of the creek, the ridge, and the Hawthorne estate. But then she added a new line, a faint winding path that Lucas had never seen before. "In the archives," she explained, her voice gaining confidence, "I saw a survey map from the 1890s. The whole area was being logged back then. They had dozens of temporary routes to haul timber. Most were reclaimed by the forest, but this one—" She tapped the line with her pen. This was a major route that went up and over Black Creek Ridge. It was abandoned after the Great Fire of 1928 destroyed the main bridge. It's not on any modern map because for over 90 years it hasn't officially existed. They won't be watching a path they don't know is there. Lucas stared at her hand-drawn map, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was brilliant. A ghost path, hidden in plain sight. Jennifer, with her historian's knowledge, had just given them their one and only chance. "Okay," he said, his mind now racing, formulating a plan. "You've given us the where, now for the how. They'll still have patrols sweeping the woods. We need to pull them all in one direction. We need a diversion." He looked at Jennifer. "A big one." The plan they devised was desperate, a final all-or-nothing gambit. Lucas would be the decoy. He would create a loud, violent distraction on the eastern side of the property, making it look like a frantic solo breakout attempt toward the main road. He would draw every one of Hawthorne's men toward the sound and the fury. While they were occupied, Jennifer would slip out the back, under the cover of the chaos. She would carry the evidence, Abigail's diary, the locket, and the badge, all secured in a waterproof bag inside her backpack. And she would take the ghost path over the ridge. She would not go alone. Lucas turned to Kaiser, who had been watching them, his intelligent eyes shifting between the two humans, sensing the rising tension. Lucas knelt, bringing himself face to face with the magnificent animal. This was the hardest part of the plan, an act of faith that felt like tearing a piece of his own soul away. "Kaiser," he said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "Listen to me, boy," the dog whined, nudging his hand. "I have a new job for you, the most important one yet." He pointed to Jennifer. "You go with her. You watch her. You protect her. No matter what. Do you understand? You protect Jennifer." He looked deep into the dog's amber eyes, pouring all of his trust, all of his hope, into that silent command. Kaiser seemed to understand. He licked Lucas's face once, a rare gesture of affection, then turned and sat beside Jennifer, his gaze resolute. The transfer of loyalty was complete. They prepared in silence. Lucas gave Jennifer his compass and a small, high-powered flashlight. He showed her on the hand-drawn map the starting point of the old trail. "Head due west until you hit the creek, then follow it north. The trail should start where the ridge gets steepest. Don't stop for anything," he instructed. Then it was time. Lucas took a deep breath. Ready?" Jennifer, clutching the backpack straps, nodded, her face a mask of terror and determination. Lucas moved to the eastern side of the house. He took a bottle of lantern fuel from his supplies and threw it against the side of the old, dilapidated woodshed a short distance from the house. He then fired a single shot from his rifle into the air. The crack of the rifle shot was deafening in the night. He immediately followed it by firing a flare from a small emergency kit, sending a brilliant red streak into the sky. The reaction from outside was immediate. Shouted commands echoed through the woods, the sound of men crashing through the underbrush, all converging on the east side of the property. The diversion was working. "Go!" Lucas yelled. "Now!" Jennifer didn't hesitate. She slipped out the back door, with Kaiser moving like a silent gray wraith at her side. She cast one last look back at the farmhouse, where the red glow of the flare illuminated the silhouette of a lone soldier preparing to face an army. Then she turned and ran, plunging into the darkness of the forest. The weight of the backpack felt immense, a burden of proof and hope. Behind her, the sounds of shouting and breaking branches grew louder as Lucas engaged his pursuers. Ahead of her lay only the dark, forgotten path, the rustle of leaves, and the powerful, reassuring presence of the dog who was now her sworn protector. Jennifer Monroe ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. The ghost path, guided by her memory, and the powerful, silent presence of Kaiser at her side, had been their salvation. They emerged from the woods just before dawn, miles from Pine Ridge, finding a small all-night gas station on the edge of the next county. Shaking and exhausted, she used the payphone, her voice trembling as she relayed a condensed, urgent version of the story to a skeptical state police dispatcher. But the mention of the Hawthorne name, Abigail's diary, and an undiscovered body was enough. The wheels of justice, long dormant, began to turn. 2 days later, the world of Pine Ridge had been turned upside down. The familiar authority of Sheriff Travis had vanished, replaced by the clinical efficiency of state police and the formidable presence of the FBI. Official vehicles lined the roads, and the Hawthorne logging truck that had blocked Lucas's driveway was gone, now just another piece of evidence. Lucas Grayson, no longer a suspect, but the key witness, stood with a sharp, no-nonsense FBI agent in his 40s near the weeping willow by the creek. The area was a meticulous grid of strings and markers. A forensic team in white coveralls worked in silence, carefully brushing away layers of earth from a shallow grave. Jennifer stood nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but resolute. Kaiser sat at Lucas's feet, a quiet, dignified observer. Then a hush fell over the team. One of the technicians looked up and nodded. They had found her. The skeletal remains of Abigail Reed, after 40 years of silence, were finally brought into the light. The locket Lucas had found was a perfect match for the one described in the diary, found still resting among her fragile bones. The truth, unearthed by a loyal dog and pursued by a broken soldier, was finally irrefutable. Armed with the diary, the forensic evidence, and Jennifer's testimony, 2 FBI agents drove up the long, winding driveway to the Hawthorne estate. They found Charles Hawthorne not in a panic, but waiting for them in his opulent, leather-bound study, a glass of expensive brandy on the polished desk beside him. He was dressed in a pristine tweed jacket, the very picture of aristocratic calm. He listened without expression as the lead agent detailed the charges. He did not deny them. When they were finished, he took a slow sip of his brandy and looked at them, not with the eyes of a cornered criminal, but with the weary condescension of a king addressing his subjects. "What you have found," he began, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone, "is the final chapter of a family tragedy." This was his plan B, his final calculated performance. "My older brother, as you may have discovered, was a reckless and passionate man," Charles continued, a mask of sorrow settling over his features. "He loved that girl, Abigail. But he was young, and he was frightened when she told him about the child. There was an argument, a terrible, tragic accident. He came to me utterly broken. I was just a boy myself. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. I did what any brother would do. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake born of misguided loyalty. I helped him. I helped him bury his secret, and I have carried that terrible burden every day for 40 years, protecting his memory, protecting the honor of our family name. I am not a monster. I am a man who has lived his entire life in the shadow of a single, catastrophic error in judgment. It was a masterful lie wrapped in a kernel of truth. He threw his dead brother to the wolves, painting himself as a tragic accomplice, a man of honor bound by a terrible promise. It wouldn't save him from prison, but it was designed to mitigate, to muddy the waters, to reframe his legacy from one of ruthless villainy to one of tragic loyalty. The agents, though likely seeing through the performance, simply cuffed him, his face a mask of dignified resignation. A week later, the storm had passed, leaving a strange, altered landscape in its wake. The Hawthorne Empire was beginning to crumble under the weight of federal investigations. Sheriff Travis had been arrested for complicity and obstruction of justice. The story was national news. Justice, in its messy, imperfect way, had been served. Lucas stood on a small hill overlooking his farm. The police tape was still up, fluttering like yellow prayer flags in the breeze. His farmhouse, his sanctuary, was now a landmark. A news van was parked on the road, a persistent vulture waiting for a story. The quiet he had bled for, the silence he had craved, was gone forever, replaced by the ceaseless hum of the outside world. "You're a hero, you know." He turned. Jennifer stood beside him, a small, sad smile on her face. "I'm just a man who ran out of places to hide," he replied, his voice rough. "No," she said, her gaze firm. "You're the man who gave my grandmother's friend her name back. Thank you, Lucas." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, two unlikely allies whose lives had been irrevocably changed. Then, with a final grateful nod, she left him to his thoughts. That evening, Lucas walked through the now empty farmhouse for the last time. The FBI had cleared it, but the echoes remained. The echoes of Abigail's fear, of his own rage, of the siege. He packed a single, worn duffel bag with his few possessions. He stepped outside onto the porch. Kaiser was waiting for him by the truck, his head cocked, his amber eyes full of a deep, knowing sadness. He understood. This place was no longer home. Lucas knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, burying his face in his fur. "It's just you and me again, boy," he whispered. He had won. He had faced the ghost of his past, the failure that had haunted his every waking moment, and he had redeemed it. He had brought a measure of justice to a soul lost for 40 years. But in winning the war, he had lost his sanctuary. He and Kaiser got into the old truck. He started the engine, not looking back at the house. He drove down the long gravel driveway, past the news vans and the curious onlookers, and turned onto the main road, heading west, toward the setting sun. He didn't know where he was going. He was just a man with his dog, leaving a past of both trauma and redemption behind, searching for a new, quiet place to finally heal. It's often said that time buries all secrets, but it cannot bury loyalty. A love that is true, whether between a man and his dog, or for a soul crying out for justice, will always find a way to bring the truth into the light. The story of Lucas and Kaiser is a powerful reminder that heroes are often found in the quietest of places, their courage measured not in medals, but in silent sacrifice. If their journey moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments below and help us continue to bring these stories to life by subscribing to our channel. Their story has reached its end, but another incredible tale is just waiting to be discovered. You can find it right now on your screen.